You are 4 years old, and no one is teaching you anything. There is no classroom. There is no teacher. There is no list of things you are supposed to know by the end of the year. And yet, by the time you are 12, you can name 300 plants, track an animal by a bent blade of grass, start a fire in the rain, and read the mood of every adult in your camp before they say a word. For roughly 300,000 years, this was how every human child grew up. No schools, no homework, no grades, no one standing at the front of a room asking you to sit still and face forward. And somehow it worked. It produced humans who could survive in the harshest places on Earth with nothing but what they carried and what they knew. So how did they do it? How did a child learn everything they needed to stay alive without a single lesson? The answer is stranger and more beautiful than you'd expect. Let's start with what ancient childhood actually looked like. Picture a small band, maybe 25 to 40 people, children of wildly different ages, all mixed together. A toddler stumbling after a 10-year-old. The 10-year-old half watching the toddler while shadowing a teenager. The teenager learning from the adults. Nobody is sorted by age. Nobody is in a group of 30 identical 5-year-olds, which, if you think about it, is one of the strangest social arrangements in human history and exists almost nowhere outside a modern school. This mixed-age world is the first key. Anthropologists who study living hunter-gatherer groups call this the multi-age playgroup. The children essentially raise each other. The younger ones copy the older ones. The older ones practice patience and leadership. And the adults, they are mostly just nearby, present but not directing. Here is where the evidence gets specific. In the 1970s, an anthropologist named Melvin Connor spent years living with the Jew/hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert, sometimes called the Closeness. He watched how they raised their infants, and what he documented overturned a lot of Western assumptions. Babies were carried in skin slings against the mother's body almost constantly, in near-continuous contact. They were nursed not on a schedule, but the moment they fussed, sometimes dozens of times an hour. They slept beside their parents. They were rarely, if ever, left to cry alone. This pattern was so consistent across foraging societies that researchers gave it a name. They called it the hunter-gatherer childhood model, and its foundation is closeness. Not lessons, closeness, but closeness alone doesn't teach you to hunt a kudu or identify which root will feed you and which will kill you. So how did the actual knowledge get transmitted? Through play. And this is the part that should make every modern parent stop and think. The anthropologist David Lancy, who spent decades studying childhood across dozens of cultures, found the same thing again and again. Children in these societies learned by watching adults and then playing at what they saw. A boy who watched men return with a gazelle would the next day be stalking grasshoppers with a tiny bow he made himself. A girl who watched women dig tubers would be digging in the dirt with a play stick, learning the soil, the roots, the technique, without anyone telling her to. Their toys were miniature versions of real tools. Their games were rehearsals for real life. Nobody graded the play. Nobody corrected it much. The child simply kept playing until the play quietly turned into competence. There's a word for the engine underneath all of this, and you have it too. Researchers call it self-directed learning. The child decides what to pay attention to, driven by their own curiosity and their own desire to be like the older kids and the adults they admire. The motivation comes from inside, not from a reward or a punishment placed in front of them. And it turns out that's an extraordinarily powerful way for a human brain to learn, because the brain remembers best what it chose to care about. So let's reconstruct a single ordinary day for a child, say, 8 years old, around 20,000 years ago. You wake up between bodies, warm, with your family around you. There's no rush. No one wakes you. You eat what's there. Then you drift toward the other children, because that's where the interesting things are happening. Maybe today the older kids are going to the edge of camp to practice throwing. You go. No one made you. You throw badly for a while. The older ones laugh, but they also show you casually how to shift your grip. You try again. Later you wander back and watch a woman repairing a net. You crouch close. She doesn't explain it. She just lets you watch, and lets you try a knot and lets you fail. By evening, you've learned things no one set out to teach you. You've absorbed 100 small skills the way you absorb a language, by being soaked in it. That's the secret. Ancient children weren't taught. They were immersed. Now here comes the twist, the part that flips the whole story. We tend to assume that school is the natural, advanced way to raise a child, and that the old way was primitive, a placeholder until civilization invented something better. But look closely at what immersion produced. It produced children who were intensely capable, emotionally secure, and almost never bored, because there was no artificial wall between learning and living. The two were the same thing. A child wasn't preparing for life. A child was already in it. Compulsory schooling, the model you grew up inside, is astonishingly recent. The idea that every child should sit in a building for years, learning in age-sorted rows, only spread widely in the last 2 centuries, much of it shaped during industrialization. The historian and many education researchers have pointed out something uncomfortable about its origins. Mass schooling wasn't designed mainly to nurture curiosity. It was designed, in large part, to produce punctual, obedient workers who could sit still, follow instructions, and tolerate repetitive tasks on a schedule, exactly the traits a factory needed. Sit down, be quiet, don't move until the bell. That's not an insult to teachers, who often fight that very system from inside it. It's just the architecture, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The psychologist Peter Gray, who studies the biology of childhood and play, argues that human children are built by evolution to educate themselves through play and exploration, and that when we remove their freedom to do so, we don't just make them less skilled, we make them anxious. He points to rising rates of anxiety and depression in children over the same decades. That free, unsupervised play has steadily vanished. Correlation isn't proof, but the pattern is hard to ignore. So the counterintuitive truth is this: the ancient way wasn't the crude early draft of education. In some ways, it was tuned more precisely to how a child's mind actually works than anything we've built since. Does that mean schools are a mistake? No. The modern world genuinely requires things no forager ever needed: reading, abstract math, history beyond living memory, knowledge that can't be absorbed just by watching the people around you. You cannot learn calculus by stalking grasshoppers. Civilization made school necessary. That's real, but here's where it lands on you. Think about how you learn the things you're actually good at, not the things you memorized for a test and forgot, the things that are still in your hands and your mind years later. Chances are you learned them the ancient way, by wanting to, by watching someone you admired, by doing it badly over and over until it became yours. The instrument you taught yourself, the game you mastered, the skill you fell into because you couldn't stop thinking about it. That's the hunter-gatherer child, still alive inside you, learning the only way humans were ever really built to learn. And think about your own attention, the way you're calmest and sharpest when you're absorbed in something you chose, and most miserable when you're forced to sit still and care about something you don't. That's not a flaw in you. That's 300,000 years of human design, pressing up against 200 years of rows and bells. The ancient world didn't have schools because it didn't need them. It had something we've spent the modern era slowly forgetting how to give our children and ourselves: time, trust, the freedom to follow your own curiosity until it turns into skill. A whole community standing close, present but not pushing, letting you become capable in your own way and at your own pace. So go back to that 4-year-old, the one no one is teaching anything. Watch them a little longer. They're not falling behind. They're not wasting time. They are doing exactly what a human child has done for thousands of generations. They're learning everything, all of it, by living it. No classroom, no teacher, no list of things to know by the end of the year. Just a child, surrounded by people who trust them to grow, becoming exactly who they were always going to be.